Welcome to Grammar Basics. I'm Lisa McClendon. Today we're going to talk about active and passive voice verbs, and we'll get a little help from zombies. But first we have to talk about two kinds of verbs, transitive verbs and intransitive verbs. And that sounds like kind of complicated terminology, but it's actually fairly straightforward. Transitive verbs take a direct object, and all this means is that the verb is doing something to something else. Zombies want brains. Zombies eat brains. Zombies chase people. That sort of thing. That's a direct object. Intransitive verbs, on the other hand, don't take a direct object. Sometimes these are being verbs. In other words, they're just telling you what something is, or what something appears, or what something seems. Other times they're talking about an action, but it's not done to something or someone. They're doing something, they're shambling, but they're not shambling something, they're just shambling somehow. So you can put it with an adverb, or it can just be hanging there without a direct object. That's okay. Now that that's out of the way, passive voice happens only with transitive verbs. And what happens to make a verb passive is that you take the direct object and you turn it into the subject of the sentence. Then you take the subject of the sentence and it becomes the agent. And a lot of times that is going to be expressed by a by phrase. But the by phrase is optional. Sometimes you can just have a sentence like this: the hunters were scared away. We don't say what scared them away. We just say they were scared away. Maybe it's not important. Maybe it's already been mentioned. But we know they were probably scared away by zombies. And that's your trick. If you can add by zombies to a sentence and it makes sense, it's passive. Now, it doesn't have to make logical sense. It just has to make grammatical sense, okay? It may be pretty absurd, but if it works as a sentence, that sentence is passive. So we have the hunters were scared away by zombies. That works. The village was attacked by zombies. That works. Mistakes were made by zombies. That works, okay? All of those sentences are passive. But sometimes you can put that on there and it doesn't make sense. So if you have something like the village seemed uneasy by zombies, that doesn't make sense grammatically. That sentence is just weird. It doesn't work right. The hunters were cowards by zombies. So again, no, not a passive voice sentence because this part doesn't work with it. Intransitive verbs, that's those verbs that are being verbs or just doing without a direct object. They are not passive. So you can be something like a coward. You can be afraid. You can seem uneasy. You can seem nervous. That may not be a very active in the sense of action verb, but it is not a passive voice verb. So be careful about that. If it's an intransitive verb, it may be a was or a seems or a become kind of verb, which doesn't seem very active, but it's not a passive voice verb. Passive voice is a perfectly grammatical form, but sometimes you're going to want to be careful because it's often wordier and sometimes it's less direct. Sometimes it's a way to not assign responsibility to something, like mistakes were made. We're not saying who made the mistakes, we're just saying they were made. The window got broken. Okay, you're not saying I broke the window, you're just saying it got broken. And so sometimes you don't want to use the passive voice for those reasons. Sometimes it's just a little bit wordier. Sometimes it's backwards. It's a less direct way of expressing something. But it's not wrong to use the passive voice. And sometimes it really is the best choice. If whatever or whoever had the action done to it is really the most important thing in the sentence, go ahead and make it the subject with a passive voice verb. Like, the fugitive was captured last night. All right. What's important is that the fugitive is off the streets. Does it matter that police captured the fugitive? We can kind of assume that. So it's going to be actually more direct to use a passive in that kind of a sentence. Use your judgment, use your brains to figure out what the best way to say something is.